Hello, I'm George from Ireland, and behind me is the last resting place of George Orwell, and he's buried here under his baptismal name of Eric Arthur Blair. So you can see some roses growing here, a good socialist symbols. We're at Sutton Courtenay All Saints Church, an Anglican church, and behind him is a memorial to David Astor, who was a friend of his who arranged for Orwell to be interred here. They've been to the same school, but they didn't overlap because Astor was 9 years younger. Don't want to say too much about David Astor here, the editor of The Guardian from a very wealthy family, who was a rather shy person despite being a journalist. But Astor's actually buried in his family tomb in London, but nevertheless as a memorial to be close to his friend Eric Arthur Blair. So it's not always very comfortable to angle it so that I'm looking towards the extraordinary George Orwell. So Orwell was born in Bihar, India, and indeed on a train I passed through the town that he was born in. I passed through in 1999, and his father was involved in one perhaps the most inglorious aspect of the British Raj, the opium department, because the cultivation of opium to sell for recreational use in India, in the United Kingdom, elsewhere, was permitted at the time. So Orwell's father was quite old when he wed. Orwell had two sisters, and when George Orwell was a toddler, he and his mother and siblings, they took ship to the United Kingdom. His father worked out the rest of his days to retirement in India, and then retired here to the United Kingdom. But they didn't live here. They lived near Henley, if memory serves. So they were sort of middle class. But Orwell was very bright. He was a quarter French. His mother had been born in Burma, and Orwell grew up with a smattering of maternal French. But anyway, he went to St Cyprian's School on a scholarship, which he loathed. You might have read about that in Such Were the Joys, which was his merciless send-up of prep school pomposities and pretensions. People saying to him, "Do your people have a car?" Which in the Edwardian era, your people meant, does your family have a car? And he lied and pretended they did, but some of them looked askance at him because he was not as moneyed as the others. And so he was young when his father died, but he managed to get a scholarship to Wellington first of all, but he had his eye on the main prize. He got into Eton, a King's scholarship, which was extraordinary. It was only in classics in those days, as in ancient Greek and Latin. That was the only two subjects they examined for the scholarship. So he got in, and he'd been pushed very hard to do well by St Cyprian's because they wanted his name on a scholarship board to say, "We're such a fantastic prep school, we got this boy to win a scholarship." So by the time he got to Eton, he was thoroughly fed up of academic work, and he just read for leisure and indulged in his various hobbies. So don't want to say that much about his time at Eton, but Aldous Huxley was his French teacher, and actually Orwell found that Huxley was mediocre as a teacher. Huxley, of course, who was another extraordinarily distinguished writer, an old Etonian himself. So bizarrely, those two had that close connection. Orwell used to go bathing in the River Thames in a spot known as Athens. I've shown you that in my videos. Just a couple of miles from Eton, and wrote lots of magazines, handwritten magazines, which are handed around. He was a noted orator. He's in this group called Sixth Form Selectors and for the Brightest Boys, even though he's actually kind of doing badly in his internal exams. I think you were in ex officio in Sixth Form Select as a King's Scholar, because obviously the 1,200 boys at Eton at the time, only 70 were King's Scholars, would put KS behind their name. He played the wall game, which is like this scrum beside a wall, for about an hour. The main match is St Andrew's Day, 30th of November. So it was nothing like as affluent as most boys there, a lot of them from upper class families. So it came to the end of his time at Eton, and he'd said to have spoke with poise and grace when he declaimed for Sixth Form Select, because the 4th of June, that's Eton's main celebratory day. It's usually celebrated in late May, despite the name. They have to give a speech, not of their own, but they recite a piece of poesy or prose. And he spoke about this thing called the Suicide Club. I can't remember which author wrote about that. People who wish to die, not through by their own hand. So he'd frittered away this golden opportunity, and he was not going to win a scholarship to university, and family finances would not run to that. So therefore he had to take a job, and he got himself into the Burma police. So the higher ranks in the police in Burma, or Myanmar as it is now, were all people by white Britons. So he passed that with flying colours, especially the French aspect of it. And then he sailed to Burma in, if I got it right, 1922. And he was up country but he rapidly grew rancorously disillusioned with imperialism, as he wrote about it in Shooting an Elephant, about a colonialist. He wears a mask and his face grows to fit it. I say that he was repulsed by the racialist attitudes of some of his colleagues, and some British civilians were there and so forth. He had to witness execution. He recalled that vividly in a piece of exceptional lucidity, even for Orwell, entitled "A Hanging." So anyway, he got leave after a few years. Your leave was about 6 months to make it worth the lengthy voyage. The ship sailed through the Med, stopped off at Marseille, and then he disembarked and just chose not to re-embark, not to sail on to the United Kingdom, travelled through France, and he worked there. You might have read it, it's down and out in Paris and London. So perhaps I shan't recount the whole biography, but he decided to have a go at slumming it, working as a plongeur in Paris, and being a tramp in London, staying at Spikes and stuff like that. And even the Great Depression, the homeless told him it was impossible to starve. In London, there were always meals to be had. So he became a socialist. He joined the Labour Party. He did various jobs, being running a corner shop, teaching at a small independent school, and so forth, despite having no teaching qualifications, no degree. It was very informal in those days. Very few people had stayed at school till 18. Being a freelance journalist, he married an Irish woman. They had no children, and then she died. Is that right? He got to a second wife, Sonia Bronwell. They adopted a boy. So he became BBC broadcast. Obviously, he was in the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 38. He left a year early, and he wrote about that in Homage to Catalonia. We don't pronounce it homage in this country. And he was horrified that Stalinists considered it more important to hunt down Trotskyites or anyone who wasn't blindly loyal to them than it was to fight against fascism. So he got out of there, and he was in the Home Guard in the Second World War. Anyway, he's best known for Animal Farm, which is a thinly veiled allegory about the Russian Revolution, about, I can't remember who said it, that revolutions devour their children. And, well, Napoleon and the other one, Snowball, more or less do devour their Pharaoh. Well, not their very own Pharaoh. It's the other beasts they turn to exploit. And the last sentence being, and you could not tell them man from beast or beast from man. Because the extraordinary thing is how revolutionary regimes, they often rapidly come to replicate the very most objectionable features of the system that they have just ousted. And then it was in 1948, he composed 1984, Reverse the Last Two Digits, which, as he said, is a warning and not a prophecy about the surveillance state and a permanent war between these totalitarian systems and so on, the cult of the personality, Big Brother, and all the rest of it. So he'd written that on a remote Scots island. I don't remember which one it was. He came down to London. He rapidly fell ill and died in the middle of 1950. But in his will, saying that he ought to be buried according to the usages of the Church of England. So it was many churches in London wouldn't want him. So he's buried here at South Sutton Courtenay, just slightly south of Oxford. So there he is, pushing up roses, not quite pushing up daisies, nourishing the soil. This is as close as I've got to him. A connection with George Orwell. Been chasing him really all my life. I first heard of him about the age of 11. Mr. French read us an Animal Farm. And here are the coins. Why are people leaving coins here? Just to say that they have connected. Don't worry, I will not liberate these and give them to a noble cause. So there you are, George Orwell, just six feet beneath my feet. He never composed any poetry that I know, apart from, well, a satiric one about Myanmar. And I can't remember it exactly, saying about some young Burmese saying, the prettiest thing alive. And I asked for whatever to do it for whatever amount of money, and she stood out for 25. So it's sort of pathetic. It's like curing of your sentimentality. So this white colonial just wants congress with this woman, not anything more high-minded. Well, that's just a little bit about George Orwell, who died in 1950 at the age of 46. I think his adopted son has died as well. He had no natural children. That's a little bit about him. He happens to be buried in the same graveyard as H.H. Asquith, the Liberal Prime Minister. I shall visit him in a minute. But although he was in some ways epoch-making, George Orwell, he's just so quoted to this day. And people say, well, sometimes we're living in a 1984 scenario. But it doesn't have the same emotional purchase on me as Keats or Shelley or some poets do. That's enough from me, so please subscribe to my channel, follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter and all the rest of it. And yes, I had to be very pathetic and say, you know, give me the readies so I don't have to liberate those off his headstone. Please donate to me on PayPal and Patreon, georgecallahan79@gmail.com. That's me on PayPal. Toodaloo.